Welcome to the viewing and listening audience to the 17th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. This is the committee's second hearing with stakeholders pursuant to our inquiry and examination of the regulation and administration of public and private early childhood care and education institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. Members of the public are invited to submit their comments or questions via the Parliament's social media platforms, YouTube channel ParlView, or via Facebook or Twitter. The stakeholders before us today include the following: members of the team from the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Tobago House of Assembly, Division of Education, Research and Technology, and the National Maintenance Training and Security Company Limited, MTS. At this time, we are going to invite members of our committee, the committee, and of course, the Social Services and Public Administration Joint Select Committee to introduce themselves. We can start with Member Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, all stakeholders. I am Avinash Singh, member of this committee, and I'm looking forward to a very productive session.
Member Mohit.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning to all those participating, other members of this committee. Happy to participate this morning. Looking forward, Member Mohit.
Thank you, Member Monroe. You're still muted, Member Monroe.
Sorry, Chairman, thank you. Good morning, all. Welcome, Roger Monroe, member of this committee. Thank you for having me on.
Member Nakid.
Good morning. Looking forward to a very productive meeting, as I said before. Thank you.
We're expecting Member Rohanson to join us in process, and we have excuses from Member Esmond Ford, who is out of the jurisdiction, and Member Penelope Beckles, who is Minister Beckles, who is otherwise engaged. We thank you for joining us this morning. We have three objectives in this inquiry. One, to assess the regulatory framework that governs early childhood care and education institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. Two, to assess the performance of ECCE centers for the period 2017 to 2022, inclusive of systems implemented to combat learning loss experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Three, to assess the health and safety compliance of ECCE centers. And four, to assess the ECCE curriculum in relation to preparation for our children into primary school. At this time, we'd like to invite the team leads from the teams before us to introduce themselves and their teams. We will start with Ms. Simone Williams, and we're asking you to deliver a brief 2-minute opening statement on behalf of your team and your entity, starting with Ms. Simone Williams, Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Education Ministry.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. I would like to introduce members of my team. We have
Ms. Michelle Collins.
Good morning, everyone. Carol Bagwinden, Director, ECC, Ministry of Education.
Good morning, everyone. Ayinka Liz Carrington, Manager, Student Support Services Division.
Good morning, everyone. Denise Moran Mohan, PCC Administrator Teacher, the County Education District.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sharon Sukan, ECC Administrator, Southeastern Education District.
Good morning, everyone. I am Jasmine Lewis Johnson, ECC Administrator Teacher for the Skin and Environment.
And I am Simone Williams, Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Education. Good morning to Chair and members of the Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. The Ministry of Education thanks you for the invitation to attend this second public hearing themed an examination of the regulation and administration of public and private early childhood institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. The regulation and administration of early childhood care and education centers, commonly referred to as ECT centers, forms a critical part of the achievement of the ministry's mandate to create a modern, relevant education and training system. The ministry recognizes the challenges identified through previous discourse on the topic of the administration of public and private early childhood institutions in Trinidad and Tobago, including inadequate legislation to regulate private centers, lack of compliance among unregulated centers, and the reluctance of some institutions to become registered. In this regard, the ministry is pleased to announce that the Cabinet has recently approved the policy for the registration of private schools in Trinidad and Tobago. This comprehensive policy will govern the operations of private schools and provide mechanisms to ensure compliance in respect of the approved curriculum, teacher requirements, health and safety standards, reporting requirements, and evaluation of student performance. Consequently, the Ministry of Education will be strengthening its capacity to monitor the ETCE subsector, which will ensure adherence to the provision of quality services. It should also be noted that the ministry recently received the first draft of the amendment of the Education Act, which is currently being reviewed and is expected to provide greater governance of the ETCE subsector. The Ministry of Education takes this opportunity to thank the committee for its examination of the state of the regulation and administration of public and private early childhood institutions in Trinidad and Tobago and looks forward to your questions and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams and your team. Let's move now to the Acting Chief Public Health Inspector in the Ministry of Health, Dr. Mark Dukaran. Dr. Dukaran.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, stakeholders, and members of the public. I am Dr. Mark Dukaran, Acting Chief Public Health Inspector in the Ministry of Health. I would ask my team member to introduce himself before I continue.
Good morning, Chair, and to all the committee members. I am Dr. Osafo Fraser. I'm the current Acting County Medical Officer of Health for the County St. George East.
Mr. Chairman, the Ministry of Health is pleased to be a part of this discussion on the examination of the regulation and administration of public and private early childhood institutions in Trinidad and Tobago, having the responsibility for the prevention and control of communicable diseases and the health and safety of the population. The Ministry of Health is committed to working with all stakeholders to ensure that a safe, healthy environment is provided for pupils and staff in all schools nationwide. Moreover, ECCE pupils form a small part of the wider community of school children. However, focus is on this younger age group is emphasized. The Ministry of Health is looking forward to this engagement and improving the school environment and ultimately the lives of children in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Thank you, Drs. Dukaran and Fraser. We move now to the Technical Advisor, the Tobago House of Assembly, Division of Education, Research and Technology, and Ms. Ann Second. Good morning, Ms. Second.
Good morning, everyone. I am Ann Second, as the Chair would have indicated, Technical Advisor of the Division of Education, Research and Technology. We are here as delegates for the Tobago House of Assembly. We're extremely pleased to be here. We're always happy to involve ourselves in the discussion and to be brought to the table that help us to move our education sector forward. So I will allow each member of the team to briefly just introduce themselves and we can proceed.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Rochford, Teacher Administrator, the Mount St. George Early Childhood Care and Education Center.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lady Phillips Allen, Teacher Administrator at the Signal Hill Early Childhood Care and Education Center.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and everyone else. My name is Lorraine George Edu, Early Childhood Care and Education Manager at the Division of Education, Research and Technology.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you so much. And we move now to the National Maintenance Training and Security Company Limited, MTS, and Mr. Lennox Ratan Singh.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I will ask my team to introduce themselves. I am Lennox Ratan Singh, CEO of MTS.
Pleasant good morning, Sherwin Gosain, Divisional Manager Marketing, MTS.
Pleasant good morning, Desmond Daly is the name, Acting Divisional Manager Security. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher Lakraj. I'm the Construction Operation Manager at MTS.
MTS, Mr. Chairman, was formed in 1979 basically to deal with the Ministry of Education and schools. We have extended our services to other public buildings in the country. And while we are in almost 100 secondary schools and over 500 primary schools, of the 141 ECCs government-owned, we are only doing security for 34, and we are doing janitorial maintenance for 1. We are doing no services for civil or the privately run ECCs or in Tobago. We look forward to this session, and we are always willing and ready to assist these sessions in going forward and building our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Before we move forward, I'd like to take time on behalf of the members of the committee and the committee secretary to extend our deepest condolences to the family and friends of Ms. Zubaida Ali Manan and Ms. Sharon Sukan, both of whom were part of the Education Ministry's team. You suffered these two tragic losses recently, and our condolences, sympathies, and prayers are with you, their families, and of course, all your colleagues. We thank you for being here. We know it's a tremendous loss for your team. Moving forward, we remind both committee members and officials to direct their questions and concerns through the chair. We remind members and officials to kindly activate the microphone on your devices when you are acknowledged by the chair, and turn off the microphone when you finish your contribution or question. The hearing will proceed as agreed to by the committee. So we can start now. If we can start with the Education Ministry, you just indicated that you have had approval from the cabinet on the policy for private schools, including curriculum, teacher recruitment, and health and safety issues. And I think one other, which escapes my memory now. Could you give us a little more information on that, please, so we get some context? Because I know members of the committee would have visited some of the private institutions and the government and government-assisted ones. And while the curricula was adopted by all, there were some variances in infrastructure, guidelines, compliance, some health and safety issues, and some issues related to teacher training requirements. So could you give us a little update or a little more information on that policy for private schools, please, private ECCE centers?
Good morning, Chair again. The policy on the registration of private schools in Trinidad and Tobago was approved by Cabinet in early June of this year. And the policy speaks to, it's a comprehensive policy which basically governs the operation of private schools. So I can carry you through some of the details. So this policy outlines the registration procedure for schools which are unregistered. So it speaks to the requirements for registration, the requirements and the needs to obtain statutory approvals prior to becoming registered with the Ministry of Education. So some of these approvals would be from our statutory bodies such as VASA, the Electrical Inspectorate, Fire Service, Health Authorities, Ministry of Planning, and regional corporations. There are other necessary documents which are needed to be supplied, such as details on the location, details on the curriculum, details on timetables, details on the layout of the school, details on the how student performance will be evaluated, because these are necessary for the ministry to provide regulation and for monitoring and evaluation of these schools. Forms are to be completed when submitted to the ministry. Site visits will be conducted. This is another key aspect of the policy, of the implementation of the policy, would be the strengthening of the monitoring and evaluation unit of the ECCE division, because they would then go out to the ECC centers and monitor the performance of the schools, ensure that they are meeting the requirements of the ministry, the requirements to be registered, because upon if a certificate of registration has been issued to a school and they are found to be deficient and have not been and are not compliant, they can be deregistered. A moratorium of 3 years is to be granted to schools, unregistered schools, to ensure that they become compliant. Teachers at these schools are also part of the 3-year moratorium in order to obtain the necessary qualifications to ensure that they are compliant with all of the requirements of the ministry to ensure that their registration stands. A copy can be provided, the policy has been approved, and a copy can be provided for the committee's
we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to hear that. And I know the other members of the committee are happy to hear that also, because upon our visits, many of the issues that you have highlighted, including the approvals, the statutory approvals, the monitoring and compliance, the expansion of the monitoring team, the health and safety issues, the teacher training, the issue of registered and unregistered private schools, were many of the concerns in terms of regulation of the sector, the private schools in particular, and some of the government-assisted private schools that would have come to our attention. While we were quite happy with what we saw of the government-administered schools, because clearly they had more resources, they had more space, the infrastructure was up to mark, the state could more easily monitor. Some of the issues that we saw with the private schools, and this session is not to bash the private ECCE centers, because what I noticed and what the committee noticed is that many of these private ECCE centers provide a significant and critical service in the community. And they are embedded in these communities, and they come from the communities and offer service. So it's networked into a community ecosystem. And while they may not have the resources of the state-assisted or the state-administered schools, they are no less important in the matrix of early childhood care centers in Trinidad and Tobago. So the regulation of them, and if I'm not mistaken, they were all registered that we visited, but they sometimes didn't have the resources to become compliant. You mentioned a 3-year moratorium for unregistered, but some of the registered ones also have issues with infrastructure and compliance and the resources to become compliant. And the concern is that while there's a 3-year moratorium, which is admirable, what happens if these institutions are not able or don't have the capacity to become compliant because of the role they play in those societies? Is it that the ministry is going to supply technical expertise and other resources to help them become compliant? Or is it just become compliant or we'll shut you down?
Good morning again, Chair. Carol Bagwinden will take the question. So Ministry of Education, definitely, we are not in the business of just shutting down and disregarding the service being provided by these providers, but we're going to continue to provide a technical support. Hence the reason we're going to go back out and continue our stakeholder engagement, because we spent an entire year working with stakeholders on the drafting of the policy, which is now approved. So definitely what we did back in October of last year, we did an exercise where private providers had to supply us with information, asking what type of assistance you may need in order to becoming compliant once this policy document is enforced and implemented. So we have that information on hand, and we go out and begin providing the necessary technical support needed for these private providers to come up to the standards.
Thank you. Let me tell you what the concern is. The concern is that, yes, this is a good move. Nobody could argue with this, but we visited 8 early childhood care centers 2 government, if I'm not mistaken, Brian, and 6 either private or government-assisted private. And most of them have not been visited by ministry officials for years. In some instances, over 10 years. And if that's a small sample of what's happening out there, the concern is that how are you going to know what is happening with those unregistered private centers that may be in areas that you may not have come to your attention, and even those that we visited were all registered and had not been visited by ministry officials to check compliance, health and safety, adherence to curriculum, teacher training, etc., because that was one of the major concerns that was cited by members of the committee when we met afterwards after visiting these centers. And the impact on those private centers of the pandemic was devastating in terms of their ability to provide the service and provide the standard of care of service to the children, because they were embedded in the community, and their parents preferred to send their children to these centers because of their connection with the communities. So that is the concern moving forward.
Chair, that is why we look at the strengthening of the monitoring of those centers, and we talk about the strengthening by the human resources necessary to go out and actually visit all centers throughout the country. And we would have the family community support officers, the health and safety officers, curriculum facilitators. They're all even, they will be all going out to render that support needed. And that is what we spoke about in strengthening of our capacity to actually go out there and meet that need.
Is there a particular framework or policy for those private centers that would have been created at people's homes? Because that's what we saw in some instances. That is part of the evolution of early childhood care in Trinidad and Tobago, where a former teacher, retired teacher, or a teacher leave the teaching service, the state teaching service, and opens an early childhood care center under their home. They modify rooms, and there's not a lot you can do in those situations. And in some of those situations, they are providing services for 30, 40 children on an ongoing basis, and as I said, embedded in the community. And that is who the parents trust. So what is the plan to deal with those? Because there is not a lot of infrastructural upgrades that they may have the capacity to engage in and become compliant and acquire statutory approvals for that kind of service being operated in a household environment. Is there a plan to mitigate that kind of circumstance? Because that's exactly what you're going to encounter in many circumstances.
Okay, so when we look at, yes, we have a fair idea of what really happening out there. A number of these centers definitely in people's homes, as you would have observed in our visits. So again, we're going to provide the support as best as possible in partnership with the Ministry of Health and all other agencies to get them compliant in keeping with the policies.
Well, I don't know how you can have a fair idea if out of the 6 private schools we visited, 5 had not been visited by the Education Ministry for years. And if that's just a sample, an unscientific sample of what's happening out there, how are you in a position to even know what the lay of the land is generally? With regard to private institutions?
I would like to suggest, I know that there have been some challenges in terms of the staffing of because there is an existing monitoring and evaluation unit within the ECC division. However, it has not been fully staffed. A number of positions are vacant, a number of positions have not been filled. However,
how many positions are vacant? Would you have that information?
We can provide it in writing for you. We can provide you the structure and the vacant positions, number of vacant positions.
One of the bits of information, data points that we also gathered is that the ministry officials didn't even know that registered private institutions had changed locations.
And that's one of the requirements. There are within the policy. There are guidelines for it's necessary for the private institutions to notify the ministry of any mandatory changes. Let me just find that for you, and I can highlight it for you.
This sounds like a Herculean task. I'll tell you flat, because I don't know. I don't know if the secretary can get for me. There was a huge number of early childhood care centers in Trinidad and Tobago identified in our first inquiry. Do you have that information about the number of government versus private versus government assisted early childhood care centers? I think the ministry provided that. Do you have it on hand?
Yes. So it is 143 government assisted centers, 57 serval centers, 12 centers in Tobago, and approximately 631 private centers.
That you know about?
That we know about, correct.
600 plus private centers that you know about. That sounds like quite a task to me, but the ministry says they're providing the resources for that, so we will wait and see. I have great concerns about this because of what I saw on the ground.
Chair, a suggestion can be that the ministry can conduct an audit within communities to try to identify as many as possible of the private ECC centers, perhaps. I know, as you mentioned, it will be a Herculean task. We can liaise with other government ministries to conduct this, perhaps, other government agencies, as part of the regulation of the sector.
I find it curious that the ministry is now thinking of performing this audit, but I'll move on. Can you comment on statements made by teachers and administrators concerning the need for teachers to reapply or continuously seek reemployment for the same positions they currently hold in some of these centers?
The ECC positions are contract positions. So they are guided by the guidelines for contract employment within the public service, normally three-year contracts. And the positions are normally advertised and persons will reapply.
How disruptive is that? Because many of the teachers we spoke to on condition of anonymity indicated that they had the same qualifications they had before the contract ended. The position is the same, but they were being asked to jump through hoops to reapply for continuing service on their new contract. And it was frustrating to them. And they had to re-interview for positions they had before that they were deemed qualified for in a previous contract.
Right. So these positions, unlike the rest of the teaching service, are contract positions. And as mentioned previously, we have to be guided by the guidelines provided by the Chief Personnel Officer in terms of contract employment, which normally speaks to advertising of positions and reapplication of persons.
Thank you. I'll defer to Member Mohit. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the Ministry of Education, Mr. Chairman, we just got a response in terms of 143 government-assisted ECC, as well as 631 private centers. And one of the issues that we would have met on these visits would have been that there were challenges as it relates to capacity, meaning how many persons can be housed at government-assisted ECC centers. So it's clearly gleaned that, the private centers are indeed needed. But in terms of training and development for teachers, I want to ask the Ministry of Education, how often are professional development training programs offered to teachers and administrators of these ECC centers, and whether the ministry can confirm if these training and development programs offered by the ministry are open to the public, or are they specifically for teachers employed through the Ministry of Education?
Okay, Member Mohit, Carol Babwinden responding here to you now. So we have ongoing training at the Ministry of Education, and we are very proud to say it is not restricted to members of staff at the government-assisted centers, but we open these training to all providers. So we even have a teacher development unit, and we have continuous professional development sessions, either curriculum delivery or how you are getting yourself, how you're enhancing your skills and qualifications in order to meet the changes and ensuring developmentally appropriate curriculum delivery of children. So that is ongoing, and that, of course, we also have our training agencies or tertiary education institutions where persons could also go, but definitely continuous professional development with both public and the private ECCE sector. The invites are always sent out to persons.
So, Mr. Chairman, another question. Mrs. Bagwandine, I'm hearing you're saying that invites are sent out to both private and public in terms of your training. But when we did these visits, one of the common findings was that persons, especially at the private ECC centers, are unaware of the offerings by the Ministry of Education in terms of professional development training programs. Can I just ask you, if your invitations are not working, and I don't know how many of them you are sending it to, whether it's all 631, how do you, as the Ministry of Education, plan to increase the numbers of persons accessing these programs, especially among those at the private ECC centers? Accessing these programs in terms of accessibility for persons from these private institutions.
So we have in existence a database providing us with the email addresses for all private providers. Some, of course, we get feedback from others. Some may say acknowledged, some may not respond at all. Where persons invite us to come in and do training, definitely we go in and provide the training to them. There is also on the Ministry of Education website where the teacher development unit, where training sessions are provided and persons could join. We would be able to provide information with the support of the teacher development unit as per the number of training sessions and the topics persons would have received training on at a later time.
Okay, very quickly, I know you mentioned, the PS mentioned in terms of the cabinet approval and the new policy which came about sometime early June. In terms of these development training programs, you are mentioning that via email you would send invitations, some would acknowledge, some would not. Does this policy include anything as it relates to compliance with training and development for persons within, let's say, the private institutions?
Good morning, Senator. Michelle Collins, I will respond to your question. In terms of the approved registration policy, we do have in there that all teachers must be trained in terms of have their certificate from an accredited tertiary institution. That's one of the requirements in order to be re-registered or registered with the Ministry of Education. And this is really to ensure that teachers out there would be delivering quality services to the children in their care.
Okay, well, we definitely look forward to that. Just one more thing that I would like to get some details on. Of course, everything is measurable success. How does it work for these institutions? And what I would like from you, based on what you're saying to us, and based on what we have seen at these particular visits, which we would have engaged in, is whether you have with you any information, or do you have a general idea of the reach of your professional development programs? And can you provide for us a percentage, let's say, of teachers who access these programs, both private and public? And in addition to that, in terms of training and development, what do you have in place, whether your policy would involve anything as it relates to students who would require that type of special training, or in terms of your liaison with Ministry of Health? Because one of the challenges we saw these institutions facing was that of persons with special needs and access to the institutions, as well as the referrals and how do they work in collaboration with Ministry of Health, etc. So do you have any type of measurable success in terms of who really access these types of training and development programs?
The training and development session, we would be able to provide that in writing for you. We just don't want to pull a figure here, as well as the topics that we would have discussed. I will ask our SSSD manager to expand more on the special educational needs of children.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Member Mugia. In terms of our special need, children with special needs, the Student Support Services Division continues to provide support for both the public and private ECCE centers. The support is provided at the private centers in a technical manner. In terms of what are some of the technical services that we can provide in terms of, for these centers, can be consultative services. We also provide advisement to parents and teachers. And due to the uniqueness of each case of the children, we provide a case-by-case consultation with recommendations for further interventions for both the parents and the teachers. Interventions that can be used both at home and in school in terms of looking at how they address different developmental needs of the children at the time. Teachers are supported through different intervention strategies, and that will continue as the process goes on.
Mr. Chairman, just one more question based on what we are being told. Can I just ask simply if you have any facts and figures to support your statement, because of the fact that what we would have experienced on these site visits, it would have been lengthy, tedious processes for these persons, lack of support, lack of information, etc., for persons who require that type of support. Teachers within these centers, parents who have children within these centers. If you do not have it, if you're willing to provide that to us in writing, but I would really like to hear some facts and figures in terms of this type of support provided. How ready teachers are within these institutions to deal with these matters, and what have they been provided with to deal with students who they are faced with in terms of special needs.
As of the 27th of June, 2023, through our special education needs assessment for the ECC centers, we have 93 suspected cases of students presenting with different abilities and disabilities, and 31 students who are diagnosed currently. Also referring to that date, we have 10 of our students receiving intervention, various types of intervention, either from the special education services, 5, and 5 from speech and language therapy. The other interventions may or may not include social work services through home visits, guidance and not guidance and counseling services, but more occupational therapy and behavior therapy. And students who are receiving the interventions are students who have been referred to the Ministry of Education, Student Support Services Division.
Can I just intervene and ask something here, if I could? You mentioned the intervention strategies of the student support services. The information that we've been told over and over is how strapped student support services is in terms of even the primary and secondary school students in Trinidad and Tobago, and the increased load student support services has encountered after the COVID-19 pandemic. You have identified 143 government centers, 600 plus private centers, 57 civil ATAL, and you are telling us that intervention services have been provided for 93 diagnosed, 31, 10, and 5, which is just over about 130, 140. And you provide technical support to teachers and parents. One of the things we encountered at a school in, is it Central or South, is that a parent was extremely frustrated to the point of tears, and a teacher frustrated to the point of tears because their child clearly had some sort of undiagnosed special need. And what the parent was going through was the ministry telling the parent, take the child to the doctor at the health center for intervention, and the doctor telling the parent, take the child back to the education ministry for intervention, and back and forth and back and forth. And the parent became so frustrated with that runaround while their child was languishing and not getting any intervention and not being actively engaged in the school. What are we to tell a parent like that when you tell us that there's intervention? And the numbers that you've identified in terms of intervention are not in alignment with what the global statistics indicate is the prevalence of children with disabilities and special needs at between 10 and 15% of the school population. So if we are to take that as the global benchmark, we are barely scratching the surface. And you could imagine dealing with a typically presenting child is hard enough at that age group. Imagine a parent trying to provide for their child in a situation where the teachers aren't trained and technical support is sporadic, because training a teacher in special needs intervention is an extensive process. Getting a parent acclimatized to what they're dealing with and also providing intervention that supports what's happening in the center is another intensive process. So what you have indicated to me doesn't seem adequate in any way, form, or fashion in dealing with the magnitude of the issue here.
The issue is a large one that we are coping with, and there is always need to increase the number of staffing we have to meet the needs of our students in Trinidad and Tobago, especially our special needs students. But there is a process, and the government ECC centers normally follow that process, and it moves from, it's a 9-step process, and I'm going to refer to the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration, March 1st, 2023, page 10. And the referral process is there outlined as the 9 steps identified in the Ministry of Education's Education Pathway for students with special needs, where the teacher monitors, engages the parent. That is discussed with the parents and the professionals of the expert process. And if there is no improvement, then referral form with supporting documentation, then moves to the Student Support Services Division of the MOE. This case is then assigned to either the school social worker, special education officer, or guidance officer as need of the recommendation, and then recommendations are implemented and the student is monitored over a period of time. If required, the student is then referred to what we call our Developmental Assessment Intervention Unit of SSSD, which houses our cadre of psychologists for further evaluation or referral, or to an external agency or service provider. Students who have been diagnosed then receive an individualized education plan, which is a developed recommendation of interventions that are then implemented by teachers and also guardians and parents. And students receive those targeted interventions, and the progress is monitored by the parents, teachers, and SSSD personnel. So that is the process for parents who have observed that the children are not reaching a different developmental stage. They can reach out and we move through that process with the children.
What you've identified there is a commendable extraction from any special education protocol around the world as best practice. The question is, do you have the resources to do that effectively, given the load that's presenting in Trinidad and Tobago? That is the question, not that you know what to do, but is it being done? Because an intervention for a child with special needs, depending on the diagnosis, needs constant attention and remediation from somebody who is trained.
Yes,
not the diagnosis, the individual education, the IEP has to be administered on a daily basis by someone who is trained. And I'll give you an example of a government center we visited, giving you identification of the 9-point plan. The supervisor at that center, is it in Central Trinidad? Followed the 9-point plan, and over a year is awaiting any sign of a trained special needs teacher or any intervention for a 6-year-old boy who has a profound developmental issue, who is not receiving any intervention and is in the institution, a government institution, almost as a babysitting. They do the best they can with him. In some instances, they have learned on their own to feed him because he has some issues with swallowing, and they struggle to just keep him occupied in the day because they have not been able to get any intervention, or do they follow the 9-point plan? So what do you tell the parent of that child?
Chair, at this time,
or supervisor has to deal with that every day.
Again, in that situation, the parent, the teacher feel free to reach out to the officers of the FSSD services, where we would provide that ongoing support and consultation and intervention.
The supervisor and the teacher has reached out on numerous occasions to student support services for over a year.
And also, added to that, we also provide student aid. So at the moment, at the ECC level, 2 students have been provided with the student aids upon their diagnosis and request. So parents would be advised by the student support services to have the aid or apply for the aid, and we try to facilitate the aid that meets to address the different needs of those students.
And if I tell you that doesn't happen in that case, what's the next point of recourse? Because the supervisor, who shall remain nameless, and the teacher express deep and profound frustration because of their care for this child.
The Ministry of Education has been in consultation with the OJT department to provide aid for students. We have been working very hard to address that need of aids for different levels of students in our education system.
Thank you, Member Singh. Had to step forward. Member Mohit, do you have any more questions?
Mr. Chairman, before we move on from this particular point, I just have one more comment, maybe a question it may include. Mr. Chairman, if I may say, Ministry of Education, that you've outlined your 9-point plan, you've outlined what you've said before in our JSC, you've outlined what you are supposed to do. And if I'm to say that based on our visits, this process is not working, I am to ask you, what's next? How are we going to make this better for these types of students, for these teachers who are trying, attempting to the best of their ability to make this work, to give these students a life? If I am to ask you what's next for you and what are you going to do, what would you say to us and general public today?
At this time, Chair, the ministry is reviewing the implementation plan for the private school policy, and we are working with our different units to provide the necessary support. I want to reiterate that our Student Support Services Division continue to provide technical support for all parents and teachers through the consultation services and case-by-case services, and will encourage parents to reach out to treat with these on a need basis.
Member Naked, are you ready?
Yes, Chairman.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Ministry of Education. Based on the previous discourse between the chairman and Member Mohit, it only serves to say that it has revealed yawning gaps in the process on the delivery of the Ministry of Education, because we were there. We visited these places, so we speak with some experience, all of us. But let's try and find what can be a possible solution. So then the question must be asked with some specific intention. How many special needs certified teachers are now employed by the Ministry of Education? That must be a question, that must be an answer you have on hand.
Chair, we can provide that detailed information in writing.
Okay, you do not have that information. But you are aware of how many special needs students, you stated that before, you gave a figure.
Yes, we have the number of diagnosed students, which is 31 at the ECCE level.
Right. And you, well, then we have to wait for your answer. Right, I would think for such a hearing that we have now, that would be information you have readily at hand for the public. How many certified special needs teachers are employed by the Ministry of Education? Because from there we can have an assessment of what is the ratio of teachers, because you stated that you provide technical services. Then what does how do we know how efficient would that technical service that you provide, how efficient would that be if we don't have an idea how many special needs teachers certified in proportion to how many special needs students that we have to provide service? Because obviously something is going wrong, as Member Mohit and Chairman Richards said. There are gaps that need to be filled. So let me make it easier for you. other than providing in writing, and all the 9-point plans and everything that we provide, I understand, I don't mean to place any of you all in any discomfort. Do you all feel that you all are getting enough resources from central government to fulfill what we know needs to be filled, those gaps that need to be filled? And you have to be honest here, it's about the children. Do you all feel that you all are well resourced sufficiently?
Senator Naked, the ministry as part of its human resource plan is trying to build the capacity of these student support division. I believe a note has been prepared for cabinet and it has gone to PMCD so that hopefully at some point soon we will have additional resources, additional contract positions for employment of persons to fill these needs so that they can go out and meet the needs and the demands of the ECC sector and the education sector on the whole, because it will not be specifically for ECC students.
Well, your answer begs the question. If you said that you're preparing a note and you're more contract, and how many then? How many? Sorry? Let me ask the question. How many? You don't have the figure.
Provide it in writing for you.
You provide it in writing.
I don't have it on.
Okay, so we have identified. I'll move on because there's no way I can go forward with further question on that matter because we are not aware of exactly how many staff is needed, how many certified.
If I could intervene, Member Naked, I mean, I find it difficult to accept that the ministry has come before the JSC to answer questions on early childhood care centers when one of the main issues is students with disabilities and special needs without the information, without information regarding the number of positions to be filled, the number of positions that are filled, the number of trained special needs teachers that are available, the number of positions for special needs teachers that need to be filled. That's astounding to me, quite frankly, that needs to be provided in writing. So the Director of Special Needs Services, Manager, Student Support Services Division, Ms. Nurse Carrington, is not aware of the number of special needs teachers that are currently employed and how many are projected to be needed for the system.
Chair, I will provide that information in writing so that you will have the exact figure.
Do you have a ballpark figure?
I do not want to guess at this time. I do have a figure, but I want to be the exact figure and we'll be providing in writing.
Member Naked, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Okay, so we are aware of, well, the failings. Obviously, is a deficiency in the structure. Don't get frustrated, Chairman. It is how it is. My question then, has any screenings, or has there been increased screenings and psycho-educational assessments for children at this level? You know, do you have any idea of the waiting times, how lengthy it could be? Because we heard those concerns when we visited. So has there been any assessment made during the screenings of these special needs kids? Can you give me an answer to that? Ministry of Education.
Sorry, Senator Naked. Michelle Collins will take the question. Okay. What has happened or what continues to happen is, in terms of the process, there is a special needs assessment that is sent out to all centers or that all teachers are to respond to. And this assessment gives us a sense of how many students are suspected in terms of a disability or a need, and those that have been diagnosed. From the ministry side, we have officers, special ed officers that will then go out, student support services officers that will go out and verify this information that's been submitted by our teachers in terms of the children that are suspected. And of course, we know those that are diagnosed, but we go through the paperwork and so on. And then from that process, support is then provided to the teachers. And then, of course, the children, the screening process continues. So we know that it sounds like a lengthy process, but of course, this helps us to be able to identify the children, ensure that the children that are identified, that they are that they do need the support. And then, of course, the necessary assistance will be sent to the centers in terms of teachers. They're trained to be able to support the children at the center and as well support the parents so that they know how to support their children at home as well. So it's a very holistic approach that's taken in terms of what's provided to children with special needs. Did that answer your question, Senator?
I don't know if you got bumped off, maybe he did. So, but I think it answered the question. Member Monroe, can you go ahead, please? Member Singh had to step out for a while Member Naked may be able to rejoin us. Member Monroe, are you there? Go ahead, please.
Yes, Chairman.
And if you could take on question 7 also, in the absence of question, Member Singh, please, Member Monroe.
Should I proceed with 7 and the other question as well?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. To the Ministry of Education, could you please tell me if there's any plans for the standardization in the delivery of the curriculum at both private and public ECCE centers to ensure the alignment of the preparedness of these students into the primary school infant level? That's my first question.
Good morning, Member Monroe. So definitely we have a curriculum. We have a research-based curriculum that it is a national document that is used, and it is also on our website and they're out in the public. So that document continues to be used at our public centers. And of course, with the policy, the approved policy we now have for private schools, that we are going to encourage the private providers to use that document. And yes, it definitely prepares the child for entry into the primary school, because as I mentioned, it is a research-based document. It's focusing on the holistic development of the child using what we call the 5 strands. So when we talk about the 5 strands, we are talking about effective communication, intellectual empowerment, wellness, citizenship and belonging, and aesthetic expression. So again, it is tailored towards the whole child and not just academics, but definitely the document prepares the child for entry into primary school.
Okay, thank you very much. One follow-up question. Would you say definitely the document is effective? And if so, how would you rate the effectiveness of that document as per se in terms of the results that it had brought forward thus far?
So we know that when our children enter into the primary school, they are critical thinkers, they are good at creative writing, they socialize better with each other. So I would rate the document, once implemented effectively, it would have tremendous results, and we would definitely be meeting the target by having a well-rounded child transition into the primary school.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, what steps would a private ECCE center have to take to become a government-assisted school?
We have centers, we have public centers, of course, we have the nominational centers. We have 21 denominational boards in Trinidad and Tobago currently, and should a private institution belonging to any one of the denominational board is desirous of coming over into the to become a government assisted center, of course, the application will have to be sent to the Ministry of Education once they fall under any one of the 21 denominational boards. So it would be sent to the Ministry of Education. Consideration would be given. It would also inform the signing of a memorandum of understanding between both parties, which would outline the responsibilities of the individual or the denominational body and the responsibilities of the Ministry of Education.
Thank you. Chairman, with your permission, may I be allowed to ask one additional question?
Please do. Go ahead. Please go ahead, please.
Ministry of Education, once again, I would like to ask a question. This one is more particularly to two ECCE within the constituency of Toco Sangre Grande. I have had many interactions with two of those schools, one in the Vega area and one in the Kumana area, who have been having major challenges with the very same said infant children that we are speaking about. I would like to know, from the date of expressing their challenges to the ministry, what is the time period that the ministry has set, or an outline time period that the ministry has in responding to the concerns of these early childhood centers? And I ask this question because I am aware that those centers indicated to me that they would have been reaching out and expressing their concerns, which I would not outline here now, but they are indicating that they have not had any positive response. I'm not saying that no one responded, but the response was not positive in the best interest of the children.
So Member Monroe, I am not sure what would have been communicated, but without having more information, I would not be able to respond effectively.
So can I ask that I do communicate with them as I usually do, and ask them to make a new expression of their concerns to the ministry?
Most definitely, you could provide my email address as well as the division's email address where the person are free to express concerns. And that way I will be able to respond.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Monroe. Just before I move on to the next, and thank you, Ministry of Education, for your answers, to the Ministry of Health. You know, I may seem, excuse my mood sometimes and my intemperance, because it is frustrating, because part of the remit of the committee is to find out what's working, what's not working, and provide recommendations for solutions. And while policy documents and procedural documents are fine, without data, we can't make an assessment as to what's working. We just can't. And part of the reason for the JSC also is to provide the public with a live overview of accountability and transparency as to what's working in their interest. So while providing documents to the committee is a great avenue, the public doesn't get a chance to hear the data points. And the data points are very important for the public assessment as to what's working in their interest or not. So without the data points being broadcast live, it's really not in the interest of public accountability and transparency. But thank you for your answers. We move now to the Ministry of Health.
Mr. Chairman, before you move to Ministry of Health, can I just ask two quick questions?
Yes, please do.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in terms of our visits, you know, there were teachers who were assigned to ECC centers for quite a number of years. And one of the things that was brought to our attention was that of pension accessibility. In terms of the Ministry of Education and their responses, I know you mentioned it's a contract position in terms of the teachers assigned and whatnot, but can you confirm whether any arrangements are being made or any type of revision is taking place as it relates to these teachers who would have been assigned to these ECCs contract after contract after contract? Really to explain to us whether ECC teachers can qualify for pension through the Ministry of Education like other teachers who are employed through the Ministry of Education?
So if I may, Member Mohed, as mentioned previously, teachers at the ECC centers are on contract as opposed to being part of the established teaching service, permanent members of the teaching service. Permanent members of the teaching service would get pensions. Contract officers get gratuities at the end of their contract term.
Sure,
So
I understand. I understand that. I know that's the process. But any consideration being given? Because at the end of it, the ECC centers, it is contract positions. But these persons are working contract after contract after contract over a number of years. Are you working to get, any type of established positions for them? What's any revision taking place? What's happening with these persons?
So prior to the amendment to the Education Act, I mean, it's still a proposal. It has not been approved by the Parliament or anything. However, the amendments include the insertion of, the inclusion of ECC centers and special ECC teachers and special needs. So perhaps consideration may be given in the future. Currently, at the end of each contract, there's a 20% gratuity. There may be a backlog. The ministry is currently dealing with the backlog to ensure that payments are received by officers.
Mr. Chairman, just one final question. When we visited these ECC centers in Central and Port-of-Spain, etc., one of the things that we noticed was that there was an issue with how many students could have been taken in based on the academic year at these ECC centers. There are quite a few ECC centers which have not been opened, some somewhat based on how it looks abandoned. Can you say for us how many of those have not been opened and when will you look at opening these, or if you have any plans to do so as soon as possible? So in some of these regions, you can at least have an ease and persons can have more access to government-assisted ECC centers?
Okay, so the ministry has a number of centers which are under construction and at various stages of completion. And we continuously work with the MTS to provide, to ensure that those centers are completed and are opened and used by members of the public.
Okay, can you state for us maybe in writing how many of those are there and in which areas are they? Because MTS mentioned they provide security and janitorial. So you're saying you're in contact, continuous contact with them. Can you provide some figures for us and the estimated completion times and when do you plan to open these so we can, these challenges of having accessibility to these government-assisted can be available to members of the public wishing for their children to enter ECC centers?
Thank you, Member. Appreciate. Thank you to the Ministry of Education. Thank you, Member Mohit, for allowing us to provide questions to you. And we move on now to the Ministry of Health, who are here, Doctors Fraser and Dukaran. to help us with our examination of assessment of the health and safety compliance of ECCE centers. Member Naked, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chairman. There is a submission from the Ministry of Health that has a report accompanying recommendations that were submitted to the County Medical Officer of Health for approval. What is the follow-up process to evaluate compliance with those recommendations?
Thank you, member. Once a notice is served, a period of time will be given to comply with the notice. Usually, inspections are done prior to school closing in July, so that time the schools would have sufficient time to comply with the notice and take the necessary corrective measures. Once the notice is served, the schools will be revisited, usually in September prior to school reopening, to ensure that corrective measures are done. If the corrective measures are done, then, and we are satisfied, we have no objection to school reopening in September. If the corrective measures are not done, then a risk assessment is done to determine whether or not the threats are imminent to the children and the staff of the school. If the threats are imminent, the county medical officer applies to the court for a closing order. Or prior to that, we normally recommend to the school principal that we have an imminent threat. And
what would constitute an imminent threat? What would constitute an imminent threat?
If we have issues such as if we have a toilet being flushed and sewage backing up into the toilet bowl, overflowing into the toilet, if we have a septic tank overflowing and raw sewage is entering the environment, these things pose an immediate threat to the health and safe well-being of the children.
Doctor, please, take a pin. Before we get to those extreme parts, I would like to ask the question. How often do you check on these schools, and are these checks random, or do you have to inform the school in writing before you go to the schools?
Okay, so as I said, usually we do at least 2 checks per year. So our first check is usually done on the 3rd term, that is just prior to school closing in July.
Is it a random check, Doc? What I'm asking, is that a random check?
Yes, we do random checks. We do not inform the ministry. We visit the school and we ask the principal to accompany us during the inspection of the school. Yes.
But you stated that you do it on a specific period before the July closing. That's what you said. So the schools would be aware that it would come at that time, no?
Right. So it would normally start from the beginning of the 3rd term. So sometime anywhere between May, June, July. So it doesn't have to be a specific date during that period of time.
All right. But I noticed that for the Ministry of Education, there are some schools that they will not be allowed access. Do you have access to all private and government?
Yes, we do. According to our laws, we can access all of them.
Okay, continue. Thank you. You spoke about compliance. You give them, you give
right.
them a.
So if the threat is imminent, and we were pointing out some of the threats to the chairman that may be construed as imminent threats, we can apply to the court for a closing order. Outside of that, if the threats are not imminent, if they are moderate threats, we consider, we work with the Ministry of Education to rectify the defects, to correct the defects, but we also monitor to ensure that these defects do not escalate to imminent threats. Right? In addition to that, if we do not have major threats in the school, then we revisit at the next period, which is the third term of the year again.
Well, Doc, sorry, but in the interest of time, do you have any data as to how many of these schools that you have visited and you have found, as you say, imminent threats that you had to close down? Do you have any data for us that we can inform the public and separate between the private and the government ECC centers? Because we saw in our visit, there was a very varying degree of what do you consider standards, as you would know. So do you have any data?
For the past year, we have not closed any school, as our focus was more on COVID. And of course, one of the concerns that we had with COVID was we should not have too much interaction or too much movement throughout the schools. And of course, prior to that, the 2 years prior to that, we were shut down due to COVID. Years before that, I do not have data prior to 2020, which would have been the pre-COVID years. So again, during the last year, no schools were closed because of any imminent threats.
Okay, well, I guess then you have a level of threat danger. You have imminent threats, you have intermediate threats, I guess, primary things that concern you. How do you grade that?
Well, one of our concerns is that the inspections of the schools focus mainly on meeting the COVID regulations. So we were focusing on making sure the schools had wash hand basins, soap and water, sanitizers. So outside of the normal inspection, we would have identified some minor threats. We did not do a full inspection to determine those threats.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, so when do you plan to, outside of COVID, to start back these visits and these assessments and inspections to ensure that these both private and public are in compliance?
As I said, inspections are done in the third term. Currently, we are undertaking inspections of not only ECC schools, but also primary and secondary schools.
Well, Doc, since you spoke about there were no notices issued to close any schools, but your visits are infrequent. I mean, they're not necessarily, in my opinion, enough. But be that as it may, can the public who, including many of the parents who may notice that certain things are not up to standard, is there a channel for them to submit reports to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If there are any health violations noticed.
Dr. Fraser would answer this.
Okay, please.
Member Nake, Dr. Fraser, I'm the current County Medical Officer of Health for just one of the counties in St. George East. But my experience is generally the same across all of the CMOs. The County Medical Office of Health is the place that people will make complaints of any nature related to anything to public health. And if they have a concern about a particular school, they will come into the office and make a complaint, or they will call to the office and make those complaints. So it's generally by telephone or a walk-in process.
Has the public and or the teachers and or the parents, have they been sufficiently educated by the county medical officer that that is an avenue open to them?
Well, I
haven't seen any public awareness ads. I haven't seen any information on social media to indicate such. Maybe you can help me.
Well, generally that information in terms of social media would tend to be on the Ministry of Health's website. And usually when the public health inspectors make their visits on a regular basis to the schools, they will have that level of contact with the either teachers or the members of the public at that time. So generally that's how the word gets out. Nothing more than that. It is through personal interaction with the Public Health Inspectorate or on the Ministry of Health website. Those are the two main ways that people are aware of what's happening.
Can I ask you to put a pause, Member Naked? So because we have like 35 minutes and 2 entities to get through. So if I could just ask you to put a pause for a minute, please. Just before I go to Member Monroe, can you give us a sense, Ministry of Health, of before COVID, how many institutions you would have visited on an annual basis?
For ECC schools, we have 150 on our current record. We know before that, we had probably a few more that would have been closed during the COVID period. So these 150 that we have on record, mainly the government schools, because the smaller ECC schools are sometimes difficult to identify. So we identify these schools whilst our public health inspectors are working in their district, doing work not only on schools, but on food premises.
We're asking how many schools would you have visited before the pandemic started on an annual basis?
And the 150 that we have unregistered, those would have been the ones that we visited.
So you visit all every year?
Yes.
Do you have a number for the private institutions that are registered?
No, I don't have that number with me.
So, but do you visit private institutions?
Yes.
Okay, member, and what is your manpower like?
We have about one public health inspector to about every 10,000 persons in the country. So a county like St. George East, we have about 10 public health inspector ones, which would focus on the schools. Then we have the public health inspector 2s, which focus on the food premises, and the public health inspector 3, who is the supervisor.
Okay, thank you. Member Monroe, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Question to the Ministry of Education, not Ministry of Education, sorry, Ministry of Health. Your submission states major defects which require significant funding often take much longer to correct due to the budgetary approval process. Can you provide some example of major defects observed at the ECC schools which require significant funding?
Again, if we visit a school and there's a blocked septic tank soakaway system is overflowing or whatever else, this requires, in our opinion, significant funding. In addition, if a school is old and dilapidated, we normally ask the input of the Ministry of Works Chief Designs Engineer. And if they recommend that the school is a threat, then of course, we may apply for a closing order. Once a closing order is granted, then of course, you might need to rebuild the entire school or find an alternative building for the student. And of course, this is a significant cost as well.
Member Monroe, if I could add, one of the challenges certainly we find with some of the private ECCE institutions is just adequate space to do what needs to be done and to house a number of children. And so expansion tends to be an issue. Additional toilet facilities that are needed to help with the actual numbers in those private institutions. Those are some of the requirements we will ask some of these institutions to provide, and those tend to require a significant outlay.
Thank you. My other question based on submissions by the Ministry of Health, which indicated that the Ministry of Health does not communicate with the school and the Ministry of Education to the schedule of an inspection, nor does the ministry communicate the findings of its inspection to the Ministry of Education. That is based on submissions by the Ministry of Health. I would like to know, is the Ministry of Education satisfied with the reporting arrangements? One, and two, should there be a greater information sharing between both ministries with regards to any and all health issues affecting ECCE schools?
Can I make a correction, please? So we do not communicate prior with the Ministry of Education to scheduling a visit to the school. Once an inspection is done, the defects are communicated to the teacher immediately, the principal that accompanied us immediately. And then when we go back to our office, we write our report, we prepare our notice, which is signed by the medical officer of health, issued to the principal, and simultaneously a copy is issued to the Ministry of Education. So we do communicate with them with regard to the defects that were identified, but we do not communicate with scheduling the inspection.
And let me also say, while we're saying we do not communicate with scheduling, we're not required to communicate, but there is constant communication that do take place between the public health inspectors and the schools. Sometimes out of courtesy, sometimes it's for convenience, but there is a communication that takes place. But there's no requirement by law for us to inform the school that we are coming to have a visit. But there is communication that takes place sometimes.
Okay, so follow-up question. After such visit and reporting to the immediate persons who are at the school and to the Ministry of Education of the issues and findings, what is the stipulated time frame that the Ministry of Health uses to revisit those very same schools to ensure that the matters were addressed?
Well, I can say it depends on the extent of the issue. Quite often a 2-week period is used for smaller issues. For larger issues, we certainly will be revisiting before the term is expected to restart to ensure that the works that we've asked to be done are actually done. But the extent to which the time period will vary depending on the extent of work that needs to be done. But anytime between 2 weeks to the beginning of the term will tend to be the time we go back for a check to see what's happening.
Thank you very much. Chairman, may you permit one quick question, please?
A quick one. Yeah.
I would also like to find out if upon visit, the situation is one that warrants the students to be relocated or be removed, what steps the Ministry of Health would ensure that the Ministry of Education and the schools carry out to ensure the safety of those students? Let's say it's a life-threatening situation that you all stumble up upon.
Yeah, in those situations, we would inform the principal of the school and recommend immediate closure or immediate relocation. And that will be followed by an actual official letter, not just to the school, but it goes right through the chain to our permanent secretary and the Ministry of Education. And those situations, I would say, generally tend to be treated with urgency by the Ministry of Education.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Monroe. Just before we move to Tobago and MTS, thanks for your patience. We're coming to you next, Tobago. Doctors Fraser and Yukaran, the Education Ministry has indicated they have a policy document approved by Cabinet, which will give them more resources to monitor more of the 600 primary private school institutions. Do you have the resources for that kind of increase in monitoring?
a quick answer is no. We always would appreciate an additional number of staff. However, we do try, because we monitor twice a year, our focus is on those schools during that period. So we use all of our staff to monitor at that period. But of course, remember, our functions are not only on focusing on schools, but other functions as well. So if I may explain, so the food program is usually from January to March. That's where we try to get all of our food premises registered. So during May to July, we don't have to focus as much on food, so then we can focus a little bit more on the schools.
Thank you so much. We move to Tobago next. Thank you, Doctors Dukaran and Fraser. Let's move to Tobago next. Thank you for holding. We had planned to come to Tobago, but circumstances prevented us. And who wouldn't want to come to Tobago? But we promised to come. We promised to come soon enough, because we were all excited to come to Tobago to visit you. But of course, we were thwarted by unforeseen circumstances. But we promised to make a trip of it, of course, enjoy the other delights of Tobago, including the beaches and the food and all of that. Anyway, could you just give us an overview from the Assembly's perspective of what the lay of the land is in Tobago regarding the Assembly-administered ECC centers and the private centers and the numbers of those in existence in Tobago at the moment, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as it stands, we have 12 government and government-assisted centers, and we have a subjective figure for the private schools because we don't believe we have all, and that subjective number is 43. We believe there are more, but 43 are whom we have visited and sure that they are up and running.
What is the, I know you've been listening to the conversation earlier on, and the issue is not the compliance as much with the assembly schools, I'm sure, as with the government schools in Trinidad, but with the compliance issues with the private schools. What are some of the challenges you've noticed at the private institutions?
They are very similar to that in Trinidad. So if and when you visit, you would recognize that they have similar challenges. A lot of them are at people's homes, on their homes, rented facilities, and they have very similar problems that you have all explained this morning.
If I could jump in as well. The last time we chatted, we spoke about the fact that we really needed those guidelines to sort of give us the teeth to be able to reel in those private sector personalities, because even though we provide opportunities for teacher training and so on, we do not have the teeth, the legal teeth to force them to do it. So we are very happy to embrace that new policy, but we do look forward to improved.
Was there any consultation with administration in Trinidad regarding the formulation of that policy that may have included unique circumstances in Tobago?
I do not recall any such thing at all.
And Mr. Chairman, I did, when we looked at it, glance, because a few weeks came to us, we've noticed that Tobago was not, or the Division of Education was not listed as one of the regulatory bodies to say do preliminary inspections and stuff like that. So it seemed like all of it resonated in Trinidad, and so we tried to figure out how that is going to work. We weren't part of the discussion, and like we're not part of the policy per se, so we would really like to know.
What would be some of the exigent circumstances that you think, based on your experiences and your training, would be unique to Tobago that needs to be considered in a nationwide document of that nature?
Well, I am thinking that the same community bond that you spoke of that exists in Trinidad exists even more in Tobago. because the majority of our children go to private schools here. So I'm thinking the document should be able to have us here at the division play a more integral role in supervising and looking at some of the situations, extenuating situations that would speak to the culture, because here the culture down in the west is different from the culture in the east, and there are things we would understand why it is so, that is very much different from Trinidad. So in that respect, I think we should have some say.
The Education Ministry document, and I'm just summarizing here, spoke to registration. Are the 43 private institutions registered with the House of Assembly Division of Education, Research and Technology?
From my knowledge, it is like a step-by-step process. The process for us, since I've been sitting in this chair, is that the preliminary stuff is done and brought to us, and we have to send it to Trinidad. I'm not sure if any of that has changed, because we haven't had much collaboration as to the new document and how things would go. So right now, Trinidad would have those figures, and I have asked for them since our last JSC meeting, and I'm still on hold waiting to find out how many persons in Tobago are actually registered, so that we can go to them, include them, and stuff.
So just to understand, they're not required to be registered with the Assembly, but they're required to be registered with the Education Ministry nationally. And you have had no sight of those that have registered with the Education Ministry, so you could have some level of, is it that the Education Ministry has oversight for Tobago private institutions also solely, or is it a joint effort between the Assembly and the Ed Ministry in Trinidad and Tobago for oversight of those private institutions?
I believe it is joint. I just believe communication and collaboration.
Well, I don't know how it can be joint if you have not been given a list of what the ones that have been registered, quite frankly. How, you know?
Agreed.
Are these funded in any way, partially or otherwise, by the Assembly, or to your knowledge by the Education Ministry in Trinidad?
No. The private?
Yeah.
No.
They're not.
Yeah. The only thing we have stepped up on and improved on, especially since after COVID, is including the private entities into our training and workshops. And those that have been registered long before are now part of the school feeding program.
Chairman, can I interject?
Go ahead, Member Naked. Yes, go ahead, please.
Good day to all in Tobago.
Good day.
You stated that you had given notice to the Ministry of Education, I would guess, as to some things that were needed by you. Can you give us a timeline when you indicated that you would need that, please?
Since the last JSC meeting, so it would have been about a month or so. I've asked, so I'm still waiting. A month or two since our last meeting. Since our last JSC meeting.
Okay, but indicate for the public, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, what position this places your committee in. What position are you in now that you are hindered from helping the children of these centers? What does that do?
As the technical officer said, it becomes difficult to enforce anything or to ask anything of the privates, especially if we don't know if you are registered, if you are part of the system, what you have, we don't know. So what we try to do when we go is to cordially invite, ask, and many of them, because they know that ECCE is not part of the Education Act, they blatantly refuse to give any information.
Sorry? What's the last comment?
They refuse to give any information.
Chairman,
You're not legally bound to provide information to the Assembly Division. Is that correct? What you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, so they don't. I understand. The issue of the 12 Assembly administered centers, and from what you know of the 43 private, are there similar challenges with trained staff for special needs students, as we have identified in Trinidad?
Yes, very similar. We have no special need teachers assigned to early childhood.
Zero.
Zero.
Assembly administered or private to your knowledge?
Yes.
So how are students with special needs in Tobago being diagnosed or referred, diagnosed, and or remediated, if at all?
Right. So since COVID, the very strapped student support services is now extending their branch a little into early childhood. Now they are very strapped for staff. So they may have one person looking over. However, we have had a system over the years that have been working in the early childhood sector, so that our teacher administrators have been advised and encouraged and trained via the TRHA people that will come into our training from time to time. When they see red flags, there are two institutions that they direct them to. That is the Childhood and Adolescent Center, where they are speech and language psychologists and stuff, as well as the clinic at the Scarborough Hospital. And it has been working because we don't have the numbers that Trinidad has. So it has been working. It is very tardy. It's the same tardiness, the same going to the clinics and waiting all day and all of that. That is similar. But those two entities has been working for us and helping us out with the special needs thus far.
And is the curriculum standardized with Trinidad for the assembly-run early childhood care centers and the private ones, to your knowledge, in preparation for transition to primary school?
Well, that standardized have a different meaning to myself and what was explained this morning. Because what we have, and I know that we have, is a national curriculum guide. This guide spells out those 5 strands and all the other things that are necessary to be taught at the early childhood level. When the member in the committee asked about the regularization or the standardization of the curriculum, what went to my mind was what pertains in primary and secondary, where it is really spelled out as to what happens and how a teacher plans and stuff like that. The National Curriculum Guide is not spelled out like that. So what we do is have regular training and workshops to break down the guide so that our teachers can understand how to formulate that big picture and then break it down with what we call the curriculum web and all of that, and then down to the lesson planning stage. So that's how we do it. So to say standardized, everybody has that same curriculum guide, but I don't think the privates, which many of them are not as qualified to read it and to understand it and interpret it, I'm not sure it goes down the line to them in the way it would go down the line to our teachers in the government sector.
And finally, for this round, what kind of challenges does that pose given there's a peculiarity between Trinidad and Tobago, where very often you may start your life in Tobago as a toddler, but your parent may send you to Trinidad to primary school. Am I incorrect?
No, you're not incorrect. You're correct.
My mother is from Tobago, so I'm very aware of all these things. And if there are issues with the training of the teachers, particularly in the private institutions, are those children being prepared, even with the 5 pillars and the guideline, for transition to primary school in Trinidad and Tobago adequately, in your opinion?
In my opinion, yes, many of them, but there are also many that I don't think are as prepared.
In closing, what would you like to see happen in the midterm to long term to help harmonize, if that's the word, and improve the services at early childhood care centers in Tobago, whether they be administered by the assembly or privately run?
In the long term, we actually have serious resources that we need in Tobago. Very often we ask for significant amount of resources because we know the needs. We know the HR needs, the monitoring and evaluation needs, we know the legal needs, etc. But we do not get the type of allocation that we look forward to in order to enhance our education sector. In the long term, we actually need 3 ECCs, physical centers, so we need funding because the size of the population is burgeoning, especially in the West. We actually need those things. We need the special needs teachers. We have those put forward in our proposals for our budget for all levels of the education sector, from ECC right up. So we're looking at occupational therapists, we're looking at speech therapists, etc. So we have those requested. We need greater communication with the Ministry of Education. We need to work together. All of the issues are very, very large, they're very big. But if we work together, if we respect each other and we communicate more, we can overcome these things together. We are stones thrown away from each other. We're looking forward to your visit to Tobago. We enjoy hosting you. We enjoy collaborating with you. And I want to say on behalf of the delegation here, we truly appreciate the passion that was represented by the chair and members of the committee. Because it says to us sometimes you're a little despondent because you're working hard with the persons in the trenches and you don't think that it's going to be reflected in the cabinet and so on. But we truly appreciate the depth of your questioning because you want to know if things are really happening on the ground, because that is what hurts us, the distance between policy and what we do. So we truly appreciate it. Thank you.
We appreciate you for taking the time to be with us. And as I said before, what we do is just in the interest of transparency and accountability and in the public interest, because very often the public is not going to a document to read. They want to see it unfold before them. They want to hear what the issues are. They want to see how they can be a part of the solutions. So we appreciate your contribution and your time here this morning very, very much. And we will look forward to coming to Tobago to spend time to talk with you more on a one-on-one basis and communicate the issues so we could find solutions together. MTS, thank you for being so patient. I apologize. Let me start with Member Monroe, because I know he has to leave us. Go ahead, Member Monroe. Has he gone already?
No, thank you very much, Chairman.
Go ahead.
Yes. 1 minute, please. Chairman. Right. Thank you very much, MTS, for your patience. I would like to find out from you all today, based on submissions stated that from the period September 2022 to May 2023, approvals from the Ministry of Education was received for 38 projects, which 31 has been completed and 7 are ongoing. The following questions are as follows. Can you name the schools where these projects are being done? 1. 2, can you briefly indicate the type of remedial works and repairs that are involved? And 3, are these remedial works and repairs expected to be completed in time for the start of the new academic year, 2023-2024?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Member Monroe. Let me just at the outset indicate the process in which repairs are done via Ministry of Education. It is not that MTS is contracted to perform services in all of the schools. The process is that the principal of these ECCs will identify whatever issue that is ongoing with them, and that will be forwarded to the school supervisors, and that will be forwarded to the Ministry of the EFFPD division in Ministry of Education, and then the Ministry of Education's PS will communicate to me as to the requirement, the scope, and cost of job. When that is done, we will submit it to the PS and Ministry of Education, and we await approval. We do not do anything without approval coming from the Ministry of Education. So from the period under discussion, MTS received 59 requests from the Ministry of Education to do scoping and costing. Of those 59, we would have submitted all 59 scope and cost to the Ministry of Education, and we would have gotten approval for 38 of those schools, leaving 21 pending. And out of those 38 schools, we would have completed by the time of preparation till now, we have completed the extra one, Member Monroe. So we are now 32 completed and 6 outstanding. The schools that we have completed and schools that we were requested to school, it's an extensive list of 59. Salubier Government ECCE, Captiville ECCE, and these are completed 100%. Quarry Village, 100%. Waterfield, 100% completed. Salubier Government, 100% completed. Marriage Hill Government, 100%. Lufin, 100% completed. Malabar Phase 4, 100. Ben Intendo ECC, 100. Harmony Hall, 100. Marriage Hill Government, that's another one, 100. Valencia Government, 100. St. Augustine North Government, 100. Valencia ECCE, 100. Bamboo Settlement, 100. All the others I'm going to mention here is 100, so I wouldn't say 100 again. Egypt Oasis, Bamboo Settlement, Mova Government, Monroe Government, Brothers Government, Harmony Hall, Push Government, Pinam, Roystonia, Union Hall, Maraval, Faizabad, Takarigua, Quarry Village, Palmis, and Nintendo again, 100% completed. Marlborough ECC, 30%, La Peralta, 25%, Chinapu, 10%. And we are working presently, the tender process was completed, and we are working presently at Kitty Valley Government, Marval, Sentance, and Punjal. Those we are working on presently. And the other, there are 21 remaining out of the 59 that we did not receive approvals for as yet.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm happy that some of the schools in the Northeast here that I heard you mention within the constituency of both Toku Sanigrande and Kumoto Manzanana are 100% completed. And I am wishing you all the best and continue your hard work ensuring that our young children have proper schools to attend to. Thank you very much to you and MPS.
Thank you, Member Mohit. Go ahead, please. We just have a short time left, and then Member Naked will be able to pose some questions. Go ahead, please, Member Mohit.
Yes, sure. Mr. Chairman, based on the submission, it is noted that one of the main challenges that MTS faces is high receivables, meaning arrears owed by the Ministry of Education. Considering the debt currently owed to MTS, has the Ministry of Education indicated to you, MTS, when these outstanding fees will be paid to you?
Thank you very much, Member. Receivables is always on top of our agenda. As you know, MTS do not receive a subvention from government, and we require funding from our clients to pay salaries and to operationalize the organization. So the Ministry of Education is owing us in excess of $350 million, particularly with respect to the ECC, approximately $20 million is outstanding. And as you know, we only do 34 out of the 103 ECCs. So we just do a mere percentage of it. The answer to the question is we have seen a market improvement in the Ministry of Education for the year 2023. Most of these debts were accumulated prior to 2023 based on COVID and prior years when there were some recessionary issues in the country. We are working with the Ministry of Education, yes, and myself have been meeting regularly on these matters, and I'm hoping and praying that these matters will be cleared up before the end of the year.
Can I ask the Ministry of Education, Mr. Chairman, to comment on this matter in terms of when would outstanding fees be paid? I'm hearing that they are working together, but in terms of the outstanding fees itself, when would it be paid? Is it 20 million, you said?
For the ECP member, yes, for the ECP 20 million outstanding.
Yes. Ministry of Education?
We will work together with MTS to ensure that fees are paid in a timely manner.
Mr. Chairman, in terms of information being made available to the public, we get that you both are working together to ensure that the payments are made. I expect that. We all expect that. Is it that you have the funding available from this financial year to make payments to MTS in the sum of this $20 million? Or is it that you need to await the next financial year to be able to clear these arrears?
As funds are released, we make payments to the ministry, to MTS, based on invoices received.
Can I ask whether MTS have submitted invoices to the Ministry of Education?
So, member, the answer to that question is that $20 million receivables are based on invoices submitted.
Based on invoices submitted. Good. Ministry of Education, can you just, for the purposes of this committee, you are stating that based on when releases are made available to you and invoices submitted, you would do payments. Do you have the allocation available in this financial year to make those payments if you are to receive releases? Or have you exhausted your allocation and are awaiting releases?
And I think Member Mohit is asking about for this purpose, because I'm presuming that releases will be under different heads or subheads in the Ministry of Education.
And of course, you would make your request to Ministry of Finance based on your allocation available. So have you exhausted your allocation? Do you need to await the next financial year? Are you awaiting releases to do payments based on all of these invoices submitted? Because we are being told that the invoices have been submitted.
We will get updates from our Finance and Accounting Division and we'll provide them in writing to you.
Mr. Chairman, can I move to my other question, or would you like to make any comments on this?
No, please do, please.
MTS, again, your submission outlines recommendations and proposals submitted to the Ministry of Education to improve security services within the school sector. Notwithstanding your comments in your opening statement, as per 34 ECC centers you provide security services to and janitorial for 1. Am I correct?
Correct, Member.
Good. Can you indicate to this committee what is the status of these proposals, and were any of the proposals submitted to the ministry accepted? And in addition to that, if you can tell us one time, because I know we're running on time, what were the general response to the proposals from yourself to the ministry, as well as whether it was opposed or not, and if opposed, what were the main concerns identified by the Ministry of Education?
Thank you, Member. I'll pass that question to the head of our marketing division.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, member, MTS is the major partner with the Ministry of Education, and from time to time they request proposals. For example, they would request proposals to complement the manpower at schools, for example, primary schools, for example, ECCs. And we would prepare these proposals and submit them. These proposals, a number of them would have been submitted over a period of time. For example, as we are focusing on ECC centers here, we would have done one to provide electronic security to complement our manpower at the ECCs where we are at, to support it with electronic security. And we work in conjunction with the ministry, and the approval is pending in most cases for some of these proposals.
Can I have a comment from the Ministry of Education on this so I'll know how to frame my next?
Unfortunately, Member Mohit, because we're out of time, I'm going to have to go to the questions from Member Nakid, because we're running out of time, because as you know, there's a sitting this afternoon. So if the Ministry of Education could provide a response in writing, we'd appreciate that. It seems to be the way to go today. Member Nakid, go ahead, please. Thank you, Member Mohit.
Yes, indeed, Chairman. In writing. Okay. Well, let's get a bit specific. There was one submission that you made to the Ministry of Education about to place an office at the Penal ECCE Center at night in light of a break-in there in April 2023, a couple months ago. What was the outcome of this recommendation to the MOE? Has an officer been placed at that specific ECC Center to date?
Thank you for the question, Member. The answer is no.
No. After almost 3 months? And have you any update from the ministry as why that is so?
We have notified them in writing, and we speak to them, and up to this morning, there's another meeting being held, and this is on the agenda.
All right, gentlemen, with all due respect, you all are in charge of security, placed in charge of security.
Member Nakid, they've taken the process as far as they can.
Wait, Chairman, the question.
No, you're not telling the chairman to wait, sir.
No, you have to let me finish the question.
I'm asking you. They've answered the question. Please move on.
They have not answered the question. I have not finished my question.
Member Nakid,
I am not here at your service, Chairman. I'm here at the service of Chikamla.
I'm not saying
you have to let me
ask
my question. This is very unprofessional of you. I would like to know why, after 3 months, that these people who are in charge of our security, what is being done to make sure that something has been placed in penal? I would like that answered. They said they took the process to the Ministry of Education. I'm asking, what is the follow-up? You cannot stop me from asking that question.
I would like your tone needs to be amended. Let's start with that.
I will not amend anything, Chairman. I'm speaking to the minister, to the people in charge of security. You could have let the question go, but you cannot want to take the limelight.
As the chair, I have the remit to manage these proceedings. Member Mohit, do you have any other questions?
Not at this time, Chairman.
Thank you very much. To the members of the MTS team, can you tell us what are the major threats you encounter while doing your duties at the institutions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the environment that the security operates in today is vastly different from the environment that operated previously. And there are new threats that have emerged. One of the major threats is school violence. Another threat is break-ins. And a third threat is the introduction of illegal drugs in the school sector.
Is this in specific reference to early childhood care centers or generally at schools?
the school sector, Mr. Chairman, the ECCs are different from the managing in the primary school sector and different from the secondary schools.
And are there specific issues related to ECCE centers, as this is the point of this inquiry?
The majority issues are similar, but we take special care in ECCs, especially with ingress and egress and where visitors are concerned. We tend to look at those areas more tightly and tend to make sure you have a rigid appointment system in ECCs.
And in terms of security concerns, are there requests for more security at specific locations, or is it a general request based on the threats and the risk assessments provided at these centers nationwide?
Good question, Chair. Request for security comes from far and wide. There are a number of areas which we have classified together and in conjunction with the Ministry of Education as at risk, and one would tend to get more requests for those for more security to be implemented at those locations and schools.
And what about the protocols, the evacuation protocols? Are you in charge of those things, or as a security consultant, or is it that those are done by the schools themselves?
We work in conjunction with the principals, and there are some areas where we assist with, and included in the scope of works under fire protection and prevention, including evacuation emergencies, conduct routine checks on fire extinguishers, as well as the identification and elimination of fire hazards, and submit monthly reports on fire extinguisher inspection. So the answer to your question is yes, we assist.
All right, thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. We're going to have to go through with closing comments. Starting with the Education Ministry, your closing comments, please.
Chair, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to come to share our experiences and the information that we have, our policy on new developments within the ECT sector. And we commit to providing the information that we have not been able to submit to you in writing. And we look forward to working with all stakeholders towards the development of the education sector, and in particular the ECCE subsector.
Well, thank you for your presence and your contribution. I would hope in the future that we could provide more actual data, because this is about, in part, public scrutiny. Thank you for your presence. To the Ministry of Health, your closing comments, please.
Ministry of Health also thank you for giving us the opportunity to be part of this discussion on ECC, early childhood centers. I hope we address your concerns effectively. So thank you once again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And to the Tobago House of Assembly, Division of Education, Research and Technology.
Thank you so kindly for the rigorous examination of our sector, because we owe it to our public and to our next generation of children. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in Tobago on your next visit.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And last but by no means least, the National Maintenance Training and Security Company Limited, MTS.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity given to us to present our information to this committee. And we stand strong, looking forward to serving the committee in any of its deliberations in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the stakeholders who appeared in this session and previously. We'd like to also present special appreciation and thanks to the institutions that invited and accommodated us. They were quite gracious in their welcoming us and answering our questions, both the two government and the private and government-assisted early childhood care centers. On behalf of members of the committee, those who were with us today and those who were not able to be with us, and of course the fine work of the Parliament Secretariat to help us get these proceedings off the ground. We thank you for viewing and wish you a wonderful and safe day. This session is now adjourned.